Thank you ever so much, Mark. Thank you for the intro and thank you for inviting me to speak. It's a little bit different to some of the other Streatham Society chats. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage in that when I normally do chats about interesting things, I can see the whites of people's eyes and I can spot when they're glazing over and I can spot when to change tack and things. So given that this is in the parlance of the latest version of Microsoft's flight simulator, I'm now flying by the seat of my pants. We'll have to see how it goes. Anyway, Mark introduced it, and the way I'm going to try to go on with this is to really just set a bit of a context, then talk about the estate, because hopefully the audience is some people that know exactly what I'm talking about and looking for holes in what I'm saying. Some people have got not a clue what I'm talking about and they're probably in the wrong talk. And a huge number of people somewhere in the middle thinking, well, actually, I've heard of it and I'd like to find out a bit more about it. So I'm going to talk about why the Telford Park Estate happened, what happened, and why is it a bit special. That was a long time ago. And it has waxed and waned, and I'll be doing waxing and waning as we go along. A big turning point in the whole thing was Second World War. But then I'm going to bring us up to date, and we're going to have, as Mark says, we're going to have a little bit of a roundup and a bit of a question and answer at the end. So if Mark's still got his microphone on, does that sound about what you're expecting, Mark?
Sorry, just putting my microphone back. Yes, no, that's fine, Chris. That's
okay,
excellent. Good. Right. Thank you.
A little bit of feedback. Whoa, that's great. Thank you. Right, so me, as Mark said, I moved here into Thornton Avenue in 1978. Previously, I was miles away in Tooting. And sometime in between all that, I managed 5 years in sunny Aberystwyth to go surfing and learn a bit about computers. This whole talk is based on a pamphlet that we produced in 1990. I will try and clarify that a bit as we go on. And the pamphlet we're currently working on to try and revise it a bit. And so doing talks like this, I'm hoping to stir a bit of a debate. And you know, get a bit of feedback going in terms of part of the problem is that for things like the Telford Park Estate, there is no real definitive history. Rather, there's lots of stuff written by all sorts of people, and it's got their views. It's backed by quite a few facts, but they've all been interpreted and what have you. So this is really my spin. I was invited to do a talk on this to friends of Streatham Hill Theatre. Again, more on that later. So that was a bit of a precursor to this. And I got a lot of feedback from that, which has meant that this one has sort of kind of evolved quite nicely. I got to do the disclaimers bit. There's lots of pictures and maps and what have you that I bought from the archive. And you can only buy stuff from the Lambeth Archive under that somewhat umbrella of personal research, private, not-for-profit, and all that kind of stuff. This talk comes under those rules, so it's absolutely fine. And anybody else's stuff that I've plagiarized, borrowed, I obviously acknowledge unreservedly. And if you reuse any of this, either the slide deck, if Mark makes that available, or any of the stuff out of the talk, please do. And I want this stuff to go broader, but you know, a bit of acknowledgement as we go along would be good. So that's where we're going to go. So what are we talking about? We're talking about, and I sort of view familiar on this largely because it's a Google Maps as of today. And the area we're talking about is roughly the area that I'm waggling my cursor around, mouse pointer around. That's Streatham High Road. That's the railway line from Streatham Hill going towards Balham, and it's sort of that bit in the middle. I'll get a bit more precise as we go along. What is, I think, a much nicer view of that is the satellite view, because that really does, for me, brings it into some perspective of this sort of green and luscious area smack in the heart of Streatham Hill that probably a lot of people have not really looked at from that perspective before. Got a couple of other sort of more, this one's actually quite old, but it tries to give an idea of the grandiose nature of the estate. As you can see now, the same shape, that's the estate there, with the tennis club smack in the middle, again, more of later. But significantly, the Streatham Hill Theatre there, again, a little bit more of later, but built on the same lands as the guys that originally owned all of the rest of it. And then we've got the Gaumont there, and this tiny little frontage there, which is quite surprising, is of course the Locarno, which evolved into all sorts of other interesting things. I just love that view, just because it just shows the magnificence, I think, of the estate. And again, same sort of thing, but slightly differently, to show how green the estate is. One of the things that I'll come back to is that part of the design of the estate, of the houses, was that they all had to have a 100-foot garden. So if you take Telford Avenue here to Criffel Avenue here, the houses with a 100-foot garden each have got 200 feet between the backs of the houses. And all these trees and things, as you see all around the place, are all of the 1880 vintage when this all started. So it's a fantastic piece of modern, as in 1880 architecture. Right, okay, going back a little bit, and please do go to the Streatham Society for all of Streatham history. The four main estates, I'm focusing on one of them, which was that corner of what is now Streatham, which was originally part of the Duchy of Bec. I might have to read this actually, because it's actually gets quite good. It was part of Tooting Bec, the derivation of which was St Mary de Bec, after lands owned by John, Duke of Bedford, who was regent of France, catching on to the where the Bec and the Bedfords and all this all sort of come together. It was all Henry V, 15th century. The land passed through the Bedfords during the ages until the last Duke died in 1802. Had no kids, and so the whole of the Bec Manor passed through his brother John, John Bedford, who broke the estate up into several parts and sold it to a number of people. The area that we're talking about, he flogged off to a guy called Maximilian Richard Keimer, who was a bit of a wide boy from all accounts. Well, he must have been, he was a stockbroker. But his sister married this character called Charles Telford, and who was also a stockbroker, a bit incestuous, I think. And basically, Keimer gave Sarah a small parcel of land, which was her dowry into the marriage with Charles Telford. So it became, obviously, because he was hubby, it became his land, and therefore it became the Telford estate. We'll go on to that. The parcel of land was roughly that. Goes back to the picture I showed originally. We've got the railway line running from Streatham Hill Station down to Balham. We've got across here, this is all the Hyde Farm estate over here. This is the wonderfully named Bleak Hall Lane, which for some strange reason they had to rename Emmanuel Road for some reason. This is Thornton Road, which existed before, and that was named after nice Mr. Henry Cecil Thornton, who was a good friend of Wilberforce. And anyway, and it goes back up. So it wasn't actually a very big parcel of land. We moved slightly on, and when Charles Telford died, the lands, because his poor old Sarah was no longer allowed to own land because she wasn't a bloke, the land went back to the original owners, which are the Keimers, and most of their stuff was in Scotland. So one of the Keimer Stewarts decided that, having suddenly been gifted basically this bit of land back, he decided to build a substantial estate of fine dwellings, which I think we've already seen that they were. Sutton and Dudley's came along to or got engaged to build it. They were a small jobbing builders from the Old Kent Road. They hadn't actually built much, but I think they got the job because they, in some way, they'd done some work for the Bishop of Southwark. And the bishop was, somebody knew the Bishop of Southwark, and the only thing they'd done was for him. So they got the job. The bright thing they did was they contacted Tarver. When I say eminent Victorian architect, you only actually had to have done one thing in the past to become eminent. And Tarver had only done one thing, but he seemed to be actually very good because he copied all the stuff that Godwin did in Bedford Park and Avoisey was doing and what have you. Queen Anne Revitalist, they called it all, and it was fantastic. And they must have gone like the clappers because he started the designs in 78 and they started laying it out, and it was all done and dusted by 1882. It's not a very big estate, and as those of you who are around here know, the roads have all got slightly quirky names: Kirkstall, Collesia, Sternhold, Criffle. Obviously, Thornton Avenue was just an extension of Thornton Road, and Telford Avenue was the main road that ran through the estate, except they changed the name to an avenue. And somehow they all became avenues except Kirkstall. I still don't. If anybody's got any ideas why that was, I'd be happy to find out. So on we go. Going back to that, one thing I'd like to point out is if you can see the mouse going around, hopefully you can. At the top end, this is Streatham High Road. There's a very, very small number of very, very fine houses along there. They all got turned into various things. That one there became the theatre. That one, and so on. No, actually, sorry, that one became the theatre. That became the bowling green there. Quite amazing. They felt, although they were inside the lands owned by Telford, he decided not to build on all of that land, and he only built on a very small part of it, which is sort of effectively the top part. So it's except for all of the big houses, and except for the bottom part, which became, and I did actually try and draw this up and I failed dismally, it became Salford Road and all the roads down to the Common and things down the bottom. But that's the area we're talking about, so below or to the west of the fine houses, and to the east of the Common, and to the south of what is now Emmanuel Road, and to the north of the railway line. So on we go. I just put in a couple of little things: High Road, Locarno, Gaumont, Theatre, Streatham Hill Station. That's irrelevant. Okay. All of you who know me, or any of you who know me, know that I'm a horrible pedant, and we have been using the term Telford Park Estate and Telford Park Estate synonymously for years. So just to clear it up, and just because I want to, I'm calling Telford Park is what that parcel of land we were just talking about, and the Telford Park Estate is the houses that were built on the part of that land that we're talking about. So there's some fantastic houses, the west end of, for example, of Telford Avenue down by the church, and they are quite rightfully part of Telford Park, but they are not houses on the Telford Park Estate. So got that one out of the way. So the original plan for the estate was 283 fine dwellings. And the marketing said that they are in 120 different styles. I'm absolutely not convinced about that. Although as you walk around the estate, you'll see that they are absolutely all unique. And the main reason they're unique is that Tarver was a bit interesting in the way he did it, was that he produced a set of pattern books for the sort of 4 or 5 main styles of houses. Double fronted, end houses, turreted houses, there were 5 turreted houses, and so on. But basically they all had to have all of the basic features that were in the books. But the buyers were buying sight unseen. They were buying before the houses were built. So everyone is different, which is one of the unique things about the estate. And the advertising said things like generous ground floor areas, effective use of wide staircases, Dutch gables, turrets, single, and actually all that exists. As you walk around the estate, you can see all that now. I mentioned before the 100-foot garden as a standard. And one of the key things that comes up again later was the Queen Anne fenestration that Tarver was so proud of. It actually is nothing to write home about, and it's drafty as hell, but windows were basically of that shape and type. An awful lot of people have obviously changed the upgraded their windows, but for various reasons, not disconnected with the fact that it's a conservation area. Even though they might have double glazed and they might have done all sorts of things, everybody has been forced to maintain at least that style of fenestration, which, say, as you wander around, you'll see it. It's fantastic. I think it's lovely. This one appeared some time ago in the book, in the original pamphlet, and I started to think about it. I thought, this is a bit odd. This is a sales postcard to try to help to sell the houses on the estate. Now, it strikes me as being a bit odd, given that they were all sold before they were built. And this one's got masses of ivy up it. So this must be 10, 15 years after the original construction. But given that you can't see what it says on the right, I sort of just worked it out for you just to help you out. And it says Telford Park Estate, Streatham Hill, for modern residences, rents £50 to £100, prices from £500. Apply F. Stanley Sutton, and as I mentioned before, Sutton and Dudley's were the builders. And he obviously practiced what he preaches, because at this time he was living at number 2 Telford Avenue, which I think is quite fun. Anyway, so we've moved on a little bit. Now the houses are mature. We're into the 2nd and 3rd generations of homeowners. So I'm kind of thinking that the people that bought in 1880, first generation, they're probably successful businessmen, but they're probably retiring about the turn of the century. So they're either their heirs are in there, or they're moving, or new people are moving in. But whatever's happening is that the estate is becoming really quite mature. It's becoming quite lovely, actually. So there we go, Criffel Avenue in 1919. Spot all the traffic. What you will spot is that although the roads aren't made up, the pavements and the curbs are. Trees are extremely mature by now. Almost all the houses are ivy clad, which is interesting, but you can still see the fenestration all the way through it. This is Collesia Avenue. Not sure why the spelling of the road name is wrong. It's probably something probably down to the photographer more than anything. But again, we were suffering huge traffic problems back in 1914. We move on to Telford Avenue. This is at the junction with Thornton Avenue, looking up the road. I won't say anything about traffic. And that's in 1990. And when I sort of spotted this one, this is my road, and I'm about the third house down on the left-hand side. I just sort of looked at this and I thought the only word that came up for me was lush. I thought that's absolutely a lush picture. Right, okay, so the estate was primarily aimed at the upper classes. All the houses had side entrances for the servants, and largely most households used the top floor for servants' quarters. They were mostly city merchants, a lot of commercial people. I say Tate Johnson legacy. I mean, this post-dates Tate and all of his commerce and all the stuff that he did with Samuel Johnson and so, but it was still of the same sort of ilk, trying to sort of keep up those sort of upper class standards. I have to admit here, I added this in fairly recently because somebody whacked me a note and saying, well, what were they doing for entertainment between when these houses were built and all the big entertainment started happening on the high road? So I thought about that a bit. Obviously, I pointed out briefly that the tennis club was smack in the middle of the estate, and so it must have played a huge role as a social focal point. I've got some pictures. I haven't got them in here because I'm not allowed to reproduce them at the moment. Of the tennis club with probably 50 or 60 very finely dressed young ladies waiting to take their turn on the courts, all in lovely gowns with they call them parasols. I was going to call them umbrellas then from it. Parasols. With the size of the houses, there must have been a lot of in-house entertainment. We had big light rooms. Must have been masses of homegrown music between 1880, 1900, 1910. But we also had probably the best transport hub into the West End. We had one of the best train services, which had existed since 1856. Streatham Hill Station was built. We had a wonderful tram system into the West End, despite the problems of getting the trams up Brixton Hill, which they solved. Fantastic. Talk about that. Well, I'm not going to talk about it, but it's a lovely story. There was probably nowhere else that had a better transport system except for North London, because they had tubes and we didn't. But then it obviously must have occurred to people, I'm speculating here, that around about this time, 1880, 1890, if we've got to keep travelling to the West End, why not bring the West End to Streatham? And Liz Burton did a fantastic talk tail end of last year, all about the theatres in Streatham, which again, very, very similar to this. It was kind of mooting to an extent why Streatham was such a hotspot of small, medium, and then large theatres around the turn of the century, and just going into the first part of the 20th century. So I think there's still a lot of facts to try and figure out about that. But I think I think it's basically Streatham became an absolute fantastic place to be as they tried to recreate the West End in Streatham. I talked about this a bit when I did this talk for the Streatham Hill Theatre. It was amazing to me that the Locarno which was, the busiest and biggest music hall in south of the river, opened in 1928. The first stone was laid at the Streatham Hill Theatre in 28, and the first production was held in 29. And if you've seen the pictures of that place, I cannot believe how much they built between early 28 and September 29, when that first production was. And they made an absolutely huge theatre there. And I was thinking about it again. I was thinking, again, this is just my thoughts, but this was in the recession. So where, somebody somewhere, or some bunch of people had the money to do all this and to promote Streatham as the entertainment centre of the South. There's a little list of some of the people that were sort of that always get talked about, of being involved in the estate and involved in theatre and arts and culture and things around the time of things growing. But it's probably a good time to mention that as part of the work that is going on to revitalise Streatham Hill Theatre, the Friends of Streatham Hill Theatre are creating a list of current creatives that live in and around Streatham or have a major connection with Streatham. And that list is going like the clappers. The people are coming out of the woodwork like crazy. I think there's about 140 people on the list, and the list has only been being put together for a couple of months, of people who are active in the creative arts. I mentioned on the bottom of the list a couple of people. Steve Norris had the big house that is now owned by a good friend of ours. He lived there until he lost the mayoral election. And John Terode was a very interesting character, lived at the bottom of Telford Avenue. And he did his house up. And he made a point on one of his shows of saying that he was giving it away because he split up with his lady wife. He was giving it away at only 3.5 million. So that sets a little bit of a context. Okay, that's the wax. Then the wane. Can't all be great forever. Because of the tunnel, the railway station at Streatham Hill was considered target. I've done a bit of work in the Ministry of Defence, and anywhere where a railway line came out of the tunnel was considered by the enemy as was very much a target, because anything could go on inside the tunnel and you wouldn't know what was happening. Fortunately, there was very little damage around the station, except for a couple of big bombs. One hit the theatre, and one wiped out Belasses Avenue, which didn't really exist as such, because the houses on Thornton Avenue backed pretty well onto the tennis club. So it was just a path through at that time between the back of Thornton Avenue and the tennis club. And that whole area is now the Goodman Crescent and the Belasses Avenue estate. I know very little about its, I can't find anything really very well documented about its history, who built it, who owns it, anything. Anyway, going back to the bombs, if anybody's got any subsidence in their house, buy this book and put it in the opposite corner to where your house is subsiding. This will hold your house up. It's a big book. It is a substantial thing, and I recommend it to anybody. It's lovely. Well, it's fantastic. And for our area, and I think I should have mentioned earlier that it is de rigueur that all maps of Streatham, and Mark Berry will agree with me on this, that all maps of Streatham seem to be on the join of a map. They're either on the edge of a map or they're in the middle somewhere. So this is obviously on the edge of a map. The theatre is over here, top middle right, and this is where the bomb landed, on the back of Telford Avenue, and we've got the tennis club smack in the middle. There were a few others, and as you walk around the estate, you'll notice, for example, these houses here aren't in keeping with the rest, because they got lost to a bomb. Similarly, up here, similarly the ones along Sternhold Avenue, and so on. So that's a fairly common picture, but that's one that I still think is fairly stark. That's the side of the theatre after the bomb, which is pretty devastating. But tail end of last year, I wandered up, and I can honestly say they fixed it. So that wasn't too bad. So we got that, and we got molasses. Post-war, I think everywhere was pretty slow to recover, and actually the Telford Park Estate took a pretty big dip in that, because of property prices and everything. Streatham wasn't exactly nouveau riche anymore, whatever. All of the houses were becoming multiple occupancy. When we started up the Telford Park Association, I was leafleting quite often, and there were houses that had 10 doorbells, which I think is quite remarkable. They're not that huge, and 10 doorbells takes a bit of thinking about. The good news is that the conversions that they did to turn them into multiple occupancy were generally very poor. Certainly the example in my house, when I moved in, mine was 4 flats. But it took days almost to turn it back into a house, because it was just a question of ripping out poorly added on doors and partitions and bits of plywood and what have you. And it was very, and I've talked to a lot of people that have done the same, and there's very little structural damage by all these conversions. And then through the 70s, we've seen a slow return to single occupancy, and again, it's sort of almost gone full circle in that the people on the estate now are largely successful business people, young families needing space. For some, the money has come from actually being successful in business. For some, it's old money from families and things, but don't care. The bottom line is almost we have about 85% of the original houses are still standing, and about 95% of those are in single occupancy, or at least in properly converted dual occupancy, sort of an upstairs downstairs proper flat type of thing. So we are sort of it's starting to turn full circle really. So as we come up to the 70s, that's Criffle in 75. Again, fenestration still all intact. Still fabulous parking problems. That's the corner of Collesia and the Criffle in 75. And just for fun, I popped up there the other day, and the only difference was the Jaguar parked outside. Right, coming a bit more up to date. It was fairly sociable. There were quite a lot of people that were living locally who, as I said, of a particular ilk. They were young, successful, small families, trading schools, information, all that kind of stuff. Quite a few were using the tennis club. There were some thoughts about conservation, and then we had a huge problem, which actually sort of G'd some people into action. Some bright spark decided to, actually they're slightly out of order. Some bright spark decided that wouldn't it be a good idea to extend the M23 through from Hooley, through basically from where it stops, currently stops, all the way up through Purley, all the way up through Thornton Heath, to stop at Brixton. That seemed like a really great idea. Not. The effect on us was that as you came in, as the proposals came in from the south, the proposals were to go basically about 200 yards to the east of the existing A23, A22, A23, through Norbury, up, completely obliterating the whole of Streatham village, then joining the dual carriageway all the way up the high road. It wasn't quite clear what they were going to do at Streatham Hill Station. And then they were going to do a cut and cover tunnel at the South Circular. And then, as I said, stop at Brixton. If anybody wants to send me a guess of what the hell all the traffic was going to do once it got to Brixton, I'd be happy to receive the ideas. Anyway, so because of that, and I got that one slightly out of kilter, there was a huge outcry, and a thing called Streatham Against the Roads was set up. Jeremy Klein, who is quite often on these sessions, was a huge contributor to this effort. I believe he actually produced these newsletters, but we had public meetings, we got everybody involved, and eventually the whole thing was finally got rid of. But what happened was, of course, that it caused a big blight on, because the estate is so close to the high road. Nobody could even think about buying or selling properties and whatever. Starr was doing the fighting the road plans, but we did what we could to help, and we did a lot of research, historical research, which we had a lot of it which was formalized, but we made it a little bit simple, and we turned some of that into the pamphlet. And we pushed for the area to become a conservation area so that it couldn't be sort of summarily compulsory purchased or basically just knocked down on a whim. So we established a thing called the Telford Park Association, all inclusive. No, it was a freebie, just for everybody, just to get everybody on the same side. And it reflected the fact that this major move from multiple occupancy to people that actually had a real big pride in living on the estate. So we produced a pamphlet, which probably I would suspect many of you have either got or seen. We produced a few, we sold them at 50p, which nearly covered the cost of the printing. We sold 1,000 in the end, which was great. And that is what I'm currently rejigging on the basis of some of the sorts of stuff that I found out recently on in working for these presentations, but also hopefully on stuff that people are going to come back to me and say, oh yes, well I've got some interesting information for you, and that's what I'm looking for after this. So said conservation area, that's a little bit more precise than the wacky pictures that wacky maps that I produced. That's the one that actually went into the council to say exactly which houses were included in the conservation area. There are many other conservation areas around us, a bit like saying there are other supermarkets. But there are a couple of things of interest. Obviously, as you come down Sternhold, there's only a few houses in Sternhold that are included. Then there's this big, that's Thornton, and so where all those big houses were on Thornton, which is now Belasses and Goodman, they're obviously not inside. Drops back down to the few houses on the Thornton of the of the original ones, and a few down on the rest of Thornton Avenue. Thornton Road goes off down there, includes nearly all of Kirkstall, all of the top end of all of the major part of Telford, all of Criffel and the all of Kaliza. So that oh yeah, that's the top end of Kirkstall. That includes all those as well. So that is the conservation area, and that was signed off on the 5th of February 1995, I believe. Interesting one is that there on that corner of Telford Avenue and Criffel Avenue is Ashley House, which is a modern block of sheltered accommodation. So how that got into the conservation area, I'll never know, but that's a bit of slight amusement. So there we go. I thought of doing a whole load of references on here, but then I thought actually it's more fun if you go and find them yourself. Lots of us are in the I Love Streatham group on Facebook, and there's stuff going on there all the time. Lots of pictures, lots of reminiscings, lots of great stuff. Mark, as you know, is the secretary of the Streatham Society. He's also involved in the Friends of Streatham Hill Theatre. He posts anything that comes anywhere, and Robert Doyle does likewise. Big plug for the Streatham Society publications. They've got masses, and they're actually, for those who haven't seen them, they're very, very, very good. John Brown writes some fantastic stuff. There's a whole range of photo books by Patrick Luby and John Brown as well. I'm sure many of you have got a lot of them, but they're absolutely great. One of the original guys who was worked with the Telford Park Association, a guy called Rod Pearson, he's launched another new initiative. I don't have any details to publish on that, but keep your eyes out for that. I believe it's going to be a much more glossy book about the estate, but I don't know so far. I can but say great things about Lambeth Archives. They are lovely. It's a horrible place to go at the moment because you've got to know what you're looking for. If you go down to have a look around, you can't, because you've got to tell them before you go what you want to see. So they get it out for you and things. But they're lovely people, and they do a series of talks a bit like this, and they did one last week on mapping in Lambeth, which I thought, well, yeah, I'll have a quick squint at and things, but I thought it was one of the best talks I've heard for a long time. I learned so much about mapping in the period that we're talking about. So sort of slightly before the conclusion, as you've probably got the idea, I'm doing this new version of the pamphlet about the estate. If anybody's got any photos or stories or anecdotes, or, you know, my old granny used to live there and she said so and so, please get in touch. There's some contact info. And I saw in one of the tweets today that Lambeth have come up with a new plan for especially if everything we get for the Streatham Hill Theatre comes off. I believe Lambeth are proposing a new restructuring of the Streatham Space Centre. I'll wait for the applause to die down and say over to you, Mark.